the Senior Director of Strategy and Product Marketing at Adobe, where he has been since 2017. Please join me in welcome to the stage, Sunil.
Morning. Sunil Menon here, kind of lead strategy and go-to-market for the customer journeys portfolio at Adobe. Thank you for making the time. We're going to talk today a little bit about how we think about the role of GenAI and how it's reshaping customer experience, both in the context of the end customer experience that we deliver, but also for what it means for marketing practitioners and leaders like ourselves. Before I get into the details of this, I want to sort of give you an example. A lot of times I get questions about what is GenAI going to do in terms of the role that marketing plays, but also is it going to replace what marketing does, right? And so this is an example that I found on LinkedIn that I thought was a really interesting illustration of the role of GenAI versus what humans can do. And for those that are not familiar, Caitlin Clark is a basketball player in the US, one of probably the highest scoring players in her college career, now plays for Indiana. While she was at Iowa playing for the basketball team, she was breaking all kinds of records, right? And so Nike sponsored, and there was a campaign that they ran. And so before I reveal kind of the actual tagline for the campaign, I want to kind of share what Josh did. He ran sort of an experiment where he went to ChatGPT, and he gave it a few prompts and said, let's see if he can generate a pithy tagline for the campaign. And so he went through a number of different examples, and he was kind of iterating through this. I'll just share some, right, in terms of what he did. He started off with a fairly generic thing where he says, generate a headline for an ad featuring Caitlin Clark, and what you see on the right is what it came up with. And he went through a few more iterations, and then he said, make it 7 words or fewer. Then he came back with this, right? And then he got a little bit more creative and said, write it like someone who's drunk. And it came back with what you see on the right. Finally, he worked his way to, OK, this was a Nike ad, so maybe kind of represent the Nike ethos. And so he said, write the headline in the style of a Nike ad. And came back with something that's kind of interesting. All right? You can see this sort of being something that would work for a Nike ad. But if you look at the actual ad that Nike produced, and somebody who kind of really understood the Nike ethos, this is what they used, right? So it kind of just gives you an example of where, yes, GenAI and AI can play a really important role in helping you kind of think and be more productive. But at the end of the day, at least in this case, humans for the win, right? Let's get into sort of the discussion here. A lot of us have AI is not new. We've seen this sort of in our daily lives for the last 15, 20 plus years, everything from how it shapes results from search engines to chatbots to facial recognition and unlocking phones. All of this is powered by AI, and so this is not sort of a new concept for us, and some of it is obvious and explicit, some of it is, sort of happens behind the scenes. But if you think about sort of what GenAI is doing to reshape how brands engage with customers, I kind of try to capture this in about 4 or 5 examples. There's lots more that I'm sure we can all think of. One, what it's doing to enhance the customer support experience. Chatbots and what chatbots can do with automating responses and producing responses even, right, that go beyond sort of a standard dialogue flow they can think of. Lots of interesting areas to explore for what GenAI can do in the support experience. You think about troubleshooting, right? Standard sort of way of going and looking for information, which is kind of purely a search-based experience. How is that going to kind of reshape when you think about the role of generative AI in troubleshooting and helping users find answers to questions and fix problems more easily? Start to think about where GenAI can anticipate customer needs and really start to kind of come up with recommendations and create content on the fly that would be helpful to better personalize the experience for end customers. And can apply in things where you look at product discovery, better search, lots of areas where we're starting to see GenAI play a more important role in reshaping, if you will, how you deliver the experience to end customers. If you translate that to what it means for us as marketing practitioners, I kind of try to break this up into 4 or 5 parts of the marketing workflow, right? Everything from what it does to automate tasks for you, right? So heard a lot about productivity improvements and what AI can do to improve productivity. So automation is a really important part of that. But it's also about rethinking how we get insights. The standard way in which you interact with dashboards and reports is now getting kind of upended with a conversational experience for how you ask for insights, including not needing to understand the schema or the data model or how data gets organized, where you can really ask a question and make it sort of an interactive conversation. What is GenAI doing to help with decisioning, right? Again, you heard a lot of this in the morning today from Vivek in his keynote. We're starting to see this play a really important role in sort of the decisioning process throughout the marketing workflow, including making predictions and ultimately leading to optimizing the end customer experience, right? So you'll see examples of this show up in different parts of the marketing workflow. We kind of ran a study here to kind of look at how this is reshaping industry, and we're seeing some industries kind of starting to adopt both AI and GenAI in a much more sort of proactive way. And this is a survey we did where we saw retail organizations are leading the curve, if you will, in terms of adoption. And again, you'll see the examples in the bottom here in areas in which they're seeing the adoption of GenAI where it is a high investment priority. Privacy and compliance, right? How can we use AI to do things like fraud detection? What is AI going to do to help with better customer support? Content creation, right? Measurement analytics. You'll see none of these should be new, but lots of areas where you can start to see the role of AI starting to make a huge difference and impact within the industry. But the reality is that sort of one-way sort of dialogue that we used to have with our consumers is now changing into a conversation. When you start to think of conversation now, it means AI has to play a more important role because you can't think about all the questions your consumers ask you. You can't think about all the ways in which the dialogue is going to go. And so it also means there's an impact on the content you need as you think of the various ways in which conversation takes place. And so we start to see the need for content export, and I'll cover that in a couple of slides from here. But how do you do this in a way where we heard this morning about talk to your customers like you know them. How do you do this on a one-to-one basis in the millions? Okay, this is the real challenge we have, where you may have taken an approach where we have a one-to-few or one-to-many conversation. How do you do this in a one-to-one way? And what is the demand for content when you think about bringing this all together? We think about sort of this as the trifecta, right? To have a really personalized experience at scale. I'm going to cover each of these areas in a bit. Data is going to be really important, right? As you think about building a single view of the customer, analyzing their behaviors, building identity, thinking about all the ways in which that information comes together. But personalization really is about connecting data and content together in meaningful ways. So you're going to see a huge demand on how content not only gets measured and analyzed, but what's the connectivity to the data that you collect, both from a customer perspective, but also in terms of content performance. But this really comes to life in the context of the customer journey. So how do you sort of unify the experience for the customer in the context of the journey, irrespective of when and where and how they want to engage with you as a brand? And powering all of this has to be automation and AI. And so we kind of see this as the way in which you can really personalize at scale. What this means is the demand for content is only getting higher. We ran a survey that found in the last 2 years, the demand for content has increased by 2x. And we anticipate with, again, the role of sort of personalization at scale and sort of what we're seeing in terms of the conversation experiences, the demand for content in the next 2 years is going to increase by 5x. Okay, so how do you keep up, right? And this is an area where, again, we think automation and GenAI is going to play a hugely impactful and important role. There are other sort of statistics in terms of the role of information in a purchase decision, and there's a lot more research being done by consumers before they make the purchase. Content is going to be an equally important part of that. And you think about multi-brand, multi-market, multi-locale. How do you sort of keep up with what we call the content supply chain and really streamlining that process end to end? Here's sort of a way in which we think about all the different ways in which GenAI will impact the marketing workflow, starting all the way from the marketing planning process. How do you think about improving return on investment? What's the ad spend that you have, and how do you optimize ad spend? How do you sort of optimize media mix modeling? All those things will have a place where AI and GenAI is going to play a hugely important role. Content creation, I just talked about this, right? As the demand for content increases, what can GenAI do to supercharge the productivity of people that need to create the content, whether you happen to be on the studio side of the house, or whether you happen to be somebody that's responsible for an email program. The third sort of piece of this is all the variations of the assets that we need to produce. And I talked about multi-market, multi-brand, multi-region. How do you sort of keep up with that and do that to shrink the overall time to launch campaign? Another sort of important thing that I've seen over the last many years is as people start to test and experiment at scale, one of the things we see is they shrink the programs because they can't keep up with the demand for content. So how do you think about now variations, not just in the context of multi-market or multi-brand, but really start to think of sub-variants of content that you can use so you're experimenting and optimizing towards a KPI. Again, that's going to put a huge burden on the content teams to keep up and produce the content that is necessary. Ultimately, you want to sort of have this play an important role in optimizing the customer experience. So you see the automation, whether it's creating a personalized variant of the content, whether it's based on the context, whether it's based on the channel, whether it's based on the time. All those things will play a role in sort of making sure that the content gets hyper-personalized. And ultimately, as I said, if you want to, you can't optimize something that you don't measure. So performance analysis and measurement also is going to get supercharged with the introduction of GenAI. So at Adobe, if I now were to switch in terms of how we think about this, you also heard this morning about the importance of trust. This is foundational to everything that we do. For the last 2 decades, as we've invested in AI technology within Adobe, it's always been governed by these 3 principles that you see: accountability, responsibility, and transparency. Everything that we do on the product side of the house, we have to go and pass that through an independent panel at Adobe that is called the AI Ethics Review Board, which means every AI feature that we produce has to be certified and validated by this AI Ethics Board. And they're going to look at everything from what data are you using to train the models. Is there bias, both either explicit or implicit sort of in the data? How do you think about how the feature shows up within the applications? All those things have to be certified before that feature gets added to a product and released to customers. We also think about sort of what is the content provenance, and how do you think about tracking and auditing where content gets produced, and how, in the role of now with the world of GenAI, how does that sort of be tracked all the way through all the variants that get generated? And so Adobe is going to be leading the way in this content authenticity initiative now with over 3,000 organizations that are part of this, with an open source framework that allows you to actually stamp every piece of content with metadata that can be preserved and tracked with a full audit trail on exactly, was it produced by a human? Was it produced by AI? Including hardware firms that are, for example, we have phone manufacturers and digital camera sort of companies that are introducing and including this in the images that get produced through their devices, right? So really sort of strong initiative with over 3,000 organizations that are part of it. And then ultimately, as I said, a lot of thought that gets put into how we test the models, how we train the models, how we think about the data that's used with end-to-end review built into the processes that we have within the organization. If I were to now look at that in terms of what it means for how we roll out capabilities that are in the generative AI space, there are sort of 3 things that we think through. One is it brand safe? A lot of you care about sort of your brand style, your brand tone of voice. So are we doing things that allow you to sort of reflect your specific brand and tone and style with the content that gets produced? Second, is it enterprise ready, right? Can it scale to meet the needs of your organization? Is it integrated into the way you work? Is it integrated sort of into the workflows that the applications provide? So it's not something that's on the side, but it really becomes a way to supercharge the way in which you do work. And the third piece is it's always going to be in the form of what I'm going to call a co-pilot. Because as good as AI and generative AI is, we still want to make sure that the marketer is in control. So it is always going to be a design time sort of co-pilot or assistant that allows you to then say, I can either accept, reject, or modify the things that are produced by the generative AI, so you still are in full control before anything gets put out there to the public. So with that, I just want to share maybe one specific example of how within Adobe, a lot of what we do, we have our marketing teams at Adobe sort of consume both the technology as well as how we think about rolling this out in the campaigns that we run. So I'm going to give you sort of one specific example of where we are using generative AI in the marketing campaigns that we run. So everything from how do you sort of create copy, long-form text for the blogs that get produced, right? How do you sort of use GenAI as a way to either refresh existing content that's out there and keep it up to date, or think about how it gets optimized for things like SEO, again, using sort of GenAI as a way to kind of supercharge that. The email campaigns that get run, right? All of that, both for our B2C and B2B businesses at Adobe, are now sort of leveraging GenAI as a way to create either subject line or copy that gets produced for that. Ad copy, right? We run sort of global campaigns, and in some cases, we end up producing somewhere between 30 and 40,000 variants. If you think of all the markets we serve, all the languages we serve, all the regions that we serve. So how do you think about sort of supercharging that with ad copy that gets optimized for spend that we have in the campaigns that we run? And in some areas, it's just about really sort of fine-tuning the creative, right? So text and image reflow. So you think about as we create various formats of the images, is GenAI going to help us with making sure that it can automatically adjust, flow of text or based on size and so on, right? So lots of ways in which this is used. Just examples of places where GenAI is being adopted. If I were to get very specific, then in terms of some of the things we've done recently. So for those that don't know, this week is Adobe Max, right? So it's a huge conference for our Creative Cloud business, very large B2C business at Adobe. A lot of the email campaigns that we run is leveraging not only sort of our GenAI sort of capabilities, but combined with large language models that allows us to then sort of create copy for email in a very optimized way. If you think about sort of big launches that we do where Studio plays a really important role in producing copy, and this is, think of it as new base copy that gets generated for ads that we publish, say, at destinations like Facebook. A lot of that is done, and so we're shrinking the time it takes to launch these really massive campaigns from many weeks now to a few days. Again, sort of leveraging our Firefly image model and just recently announced video model, combined with a large language model to kind of produce the copy for ads at Facebook. And then what we're also doing is empowering the marketing teams to take base copy and start to sort of do variants of that, right? And sort of use that for some of the campaigns that we run, where marketing can do this in a self-service way without having to go back and rely on studio teams or agencies to kind of help with that, right? And so we see a number of different ways in which we've leveraged this more recently, and we've seen some really interesting results. So you think about the email campaign that we ran, 50% lift in click-through rates. If you think about sort of the Facebook ads that we ran, it's 125% improvement in overall ROI. So you can start to see this really making a huge impact, not just in shrinking the time it takes for us to launch campaigns, but actually producing impactful results with the combination of the humans plus GenAI. Which is why we're kind of really excited to be here, right? So as a partner with Movable Inc., what we're announcing now is the availability of a very tight integration between one of the products that Adobe takes to market for journey orchestration called Adobe Journey Optimizer, and the DaVinci product where we really want to sort of bring the best of both capabilities together in a way where we can automate sort of email variant generation, integrate that into the workflow so that as you build a journey and as you build content that gets put in front of your customers, it's done so in an integrated form. And then, of course, we're feeding all the data back, right? So we're collecting opens, clicks, sends, all the behavioral data, and we want to feed that back to DaVinci so it can then further optimize the generation of the content. And if I were to think about that in terms of a very simple workflow, we take all the data that we collect, and we share that to DaVinci, right? And so that now gets used in the production of the content and the variants. And then from within DaVinci, as you create sort of the content, that then sort of allows us to integrate that into the email variants that get used by Journey Optimizer. So when we send a message out as part of a omni-channel journey, now it's leveraging the content and the automation that was available through DaVinci, and ultimately sort of we're able to orchestrate a much more personalized one-to-one journey for end customers. So with that, I know I'm going to run out of time here. just three sort of things that I would say as a call to action, right? You heard this morning about being customer-centric, and so a lot of what we say is, yes, use AI and use GenAI, but design around what your customer needs are and make sure that it works for them. Two, as we think about sort of the personalization workflow, the content in a supply chain, use AI and GenAI to automate that process, to shrink the time it takes to launch a campaign to market. And then three, AI is not going to be the answer for every problem in every situation. So be very specific and deliberate in terms of how you think about where AI can help your teams, and then how it's going to help supercharge not only productivity, but also shrink the time to market to launch campaigns. So with that, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the day.